When you wake up on an island where no one comes, the real question isn't how you got there, it's how you'll ever leave. The thought pulsed in the back of Emily's mind as she leaned against the ferry's railing, watching the black water churn below. The last ferry of the night cut through the sea like a blade, its rusting hull creaking with every wave. The captain had hardly spoken since they boarded, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his cap, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon as though he were afraid to look anywhere else. Behind her, her friends filled the deck with laughter that felt too loud, too alive against the hush of the sea. There were 6 of them in total: Emily, her boyfriend Mark, best friends Lila and Jason, and the inseparable duo of Nate and Zoe. They had been talking about this trip for months, a weekend of camping on a remote island, a chance to escape the noise of the mainland, to trade cell towers for starlight and campfires. The brochures had made the place sound idyllic: unspoiled beaches, quiet forests, hiking trails that led to breathtaking cliffs. But the brochures hadn't mentioned the ferry. It looked like it had been pulled from another century, its once white paint now peeling to expose the corroded steel beneath. Wooden benches were bolted along the sides, weathered to the point of splinters. The air reeked of salt, diesel, and something older, like damp wood that had never fully dried. "Tell me this doesn't feel like the beginning of a horror movie," Jason joked, nudging Lila as the deck groaned under their weight. Last boat of the night, creepy old captain, creepy old ship. Classic setup. "We're doomed." Lila rolled her eyes but smiled, pulling her jacket tighter against the chill. "You watch too many movies. It's just a ferry, Jace. People take it every day." Emily frowned, glancing back at the captain. He hadn't so much as checked their tickets. In fact, she wasn't even sure there had been tickets. The dock worker had just waved them through with a muttered warning about making it quick if they wanted to catch the last run. Something about the way he said it had chilled her, but she hadn't wanted to ruin the group's excitement by admitting it. Mark wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're shivering," he said softly. "Cold?" "Just the wind," Emily lied. She didn't want to admit that the shiver came from something deeper, a gnawing unease that had been growing since they'd set foot on the deck. It was in the silence of the sea, the way the stars seemed swallowed by clouds, the way the captain's hands trembled ever so slightly as he gripped the wheel. The ferry's engine coughed, then steadied into a low, throbbing hum. The sound seemed to vibrate through their bones. Zoe, always the boldest of the group, leaned against the railing beside Emily and peered into the dark waves. "You can't even see the shore anymore," she said, her voice oddly hushed. "It's like we're floating in nothing." "Which is exactly why this is amazing," Nate said, slipping an arm around her waist. "Come on, how often do you get to camp on a deserted island? No phones, no parents, no work. Just us and the ocean." "Yeah," Jason added with a grin, "and a creepy ferry that's probably haunted." The word hung in the air longer than it should have. Haunted. Emily looked at him sharply, but his grin faltered, as if he'd felt it too, the heaviness, the wrongness pressing down on them. As the ferry pushed deeper into the darkness, Emily noticed something odd. There were no lights on the horizon. No twinkling towns, no faint glow of a lighthouse. Only black water stretching endlessly in every direction. She turned back toward the mainland, but even that was gone now, swallowed by fog. A chill licked up her spine. "Shouldn't we be able to see the island by now?" she asked, her voice small against the drone of the engine. Mark frowned, following her gaze. "How long's it been?" "An hour," Jason said, checking his watch. "Brochure said the trip takes 30 minutes. That silenced them. Even the laughter that had bubbled so easily minutes before seemed to wither, replaced by glances toward the captain. But he offered no explanation, no reassurance. He simply stood at the wheel, his shoulders rigid, his gaze locked on the darkness ahead. "Excuse me," Zoe called, stepping forward. "How much longer until we reach the island?" The captain didn't answer. He didn't even turn his head. "Hey!" Nate added, louder this time. "We're asking you a question." The captain's voice came at last, low and gravelly, each word weighed down by something that sounded almost like sorrow. "You don't ask how long. You ask how far? A hush fell over the group. Emily's chest tightened. How far, then? She whispered. The captain's hands tightened on the wheel. Farther than you think. Before anyone could press him further, the ferry gave a violent lurch. The deck tilted, sending them stumbling. Emily clutched the railing, her heart slamming in her chest. The engine's hum faltered, then resumed with a sickly sputter. Through the fog ahead, a shape began to emerge. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shadow, but as the ferry crept closer, the outline sharpened into jagged cliffs and dense trees clawing at the sky. The island. Zoe let out a relieved laugh. See? We were worried for nothing. But Emily couldn't shake the captain's words. Farther than you think. The ferry groaned as it bumped against the worn wooden dock, ropes tossed half-heartedly to secure it. The captain finally turned to face them, his expression obscured by the brim of his cap, his mouth a grim line. This is the last run, he said flatly. There won't be another. Before they could ask what he meant, he gestured them off the boat. And as the 6 friends stepped onto the dock, the ferry's engine roared back to life. By the time they turned around, the captain was already gone, vanishing into the fog with a finality that felt like a door slamming shut. The wooden dock beneath their feet creaked with every step, the sound swallowed by the vast silence of the night. The fog curled low over the surface of the water, wrapping itself around the posts like skeletal fingers, and when Emily looked back, the ferry was gone, as though it had never existed. Only the Black Sea remained, shifting restlessly in the gloom. Her breath hitched, but no one else seemed willing to speak it aloud. They were stranded. Jason forced a laugh, though it came out too loud, too thin. Well, that was dramatic. Guess old man Captain likes to make an exit. He adjusted his backpack and strode ahead, as if the firm weight of his gear on his shoulders could anchor him against the gnawing strangeness pressing in. But his steps were quicker than usual, betraying his unease. The dock led into a narrow dirt path swallowed by trees, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes, silhouetted against the faint gleam of the moon. The air here was heavier, colder, carrying the faint tang of salt and something else, something rotten, faint but undeniable. The group exchanged glances, but Mark, ever the steady one, was the first to break the silence. Come on. Let's find a spot to camp before it gets too late. He tightened his grip on Emily's hand and gave her a reassuring smile, though his eyes darted uneasily toward the forest as he spoke. It's just an island. Same as any other. We'll set up camp, build a fire, and by morning it'll feel normal. But Emily couldn't shake the words of the captain, there won't be another. They pressed against her mind like a bruise, tender and unyielding. She followed Mark anyway, her footsteps crunching softly against the dirt as the path drew them deeper into the trees. The forest closed in quickly. The canopy swallowed what little moonlight had been filtering down, replacing it with an oppressive shadow. Their flashlights cut through the dark and narrow beams, trembling slightly in their hands. Nate tried to break the tension with chatter, pointing out how remote the island felt, how peaceful it would be without cell reception or crowds, but his voice faltered when Zoe snapped, "It's too quiet." And it was. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant bird calls. Just the crunch of their boots and the wheeze of their breaths. Even the ocean's rhythmic lap against the shore had faded once they stepped beneath the trees, leaving a silence so complete it pressed against their eardrums. Lila slowed her pace, glancing over her shoulder. "Did you guys hear that?" Everyone stopped, straining. The silence stretched on, unbroken. Jason gave her a sideways look. "What?" "I thought I heard," she stopped, frowning. "Never mind." But Emily had heard it too. A faint shuffle, like footsteps mirroring theirs a few beats behind. She swallowed hard, tightening her grip on Mark's arm, and forced herself not to look back. The path widened at last, opening into a small clearing. The ground here was flat, covered with dry grass that crunched softly beneath their feet. It would serve well enough for a campsite. The group moved quickly, grateful for the distraction, unpacking tents and gear. Their flashlights bobbed and dipped like tiny fireflies as nylon snapped, poles clicked, and stakes dug into the earth. Zoe lit a lantern, its yellow glow spilling across the clearing. For the first time since stepping onto the island, they had light enough to see one another's faces clearly. Emily wished they hadn't. The strain was evident in all of them, the forced smiles, the too wide eyes, the way every laugh sounded brittle and eager. Mark tried to lighten the mood. "We'll laugh about this tomorrow. Ferry disappears, creepy island, just makes the trip more memorable, right?" Jason smirked. "Yeah, we'll tell everyone we survived the island of no return." The joke should have made them laugh, but the words clung to the air like cobwebs. When the tents were finally up and the campfire sparked to life, the clearing filled with warmth and flickering shadows. For a moment, Emily almost believed they could pretend this was normal. The fire hissed as flames licked the wood, smoke curling upward, carrying with it the scent of pine and ash. The light drove back the dark, but only just, and the forest beyond the ring of firelight remained an unbroken wall of black. Nate pulled out a flask, raising it in a mock toast. "To adventure," he said, voice lighter now, though his hand shook as he passed it around. They drank, they laughed, they shared stories, but beneath it all, there was an edge, a tautness in every glance toward the shadows. It was as though they all knew something was wrong, but no one dared to say it aloud. Emily sat close to the fire, staring into the flames. The crackle and pop were oddly soothing, masking the silence beyond. But then, faintly, she heard it again, that shuffle. That faint crunch of leaves where no one stood. Her breath caught. She turned sharply, her flashlight beam slicing through the trees. Nothing. Still, her heart hammered, her skin prickling with goosebumps. She opened her mouth to tell the others but stopped when she saw Jason watching her. He had heard it too. The two locked eyes across the fire, and in that unspoken exchange, the truth settled cold and heavy between them. They were not alone. And as if to confirm it, a gust of wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faintest echo of something human. A voice. Too low to understand, but undeniably there. The laughter around the fire waned as the night deepened, every ember crackling like a heartbeat in the silence. Though the group tried to keep their conversation light, their words faltered, each pause stretching longer than the last. The shadows seemed to creep closer, pressing against the ring of firelight, and the forest loomed like an audience of darkened faces just beyond their reach. Emily sat hunched near the flames, arms wrapped around her knees, her gaze flicking again and again toward the wall of trees. She could still hear the faint sound of movement out there, always just beyond sight, like someone pacing, waiting. Jason's eyes darted to her once more, their silent exchange from earlier lingering unspoken between them. He knew she'd heard it too. He reached for the flask again, though his hand trembled as he raised it. "Well," he said, voice forced into nonchalance, "if this is how horror movies start, at least we've got fire. Monsters hate fire, right?" "Shut up," Zoe muttered sharply, though the bite in her voice was thinly veiled fear. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself and leaned closer to Lila. Her eyes scanned the tree in quick, jerking motions. "You're not helping." Mark poked at the flames with a long stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night. He smiled at Emily reassuringly, though the corners of his mouth twitched. "We're fine. It's just isolation playing tricks. I mean, listen. Not a single sound but us. It feels unnatural, sure, but that doesn't mean anything's out there." But his words hung hollow in the air. Emily noticed that he, too, couldn't stop glancing into the shadows. The silence pressed tighter, thick and suffocating. It was Nate who broke it this time, his voice tentative. "You guys ever hear that urban legend about islands like this?" He was staring into the fire, as if the flames could shield him from whatever else might be listening. Places where people used to live, but something wrong happened. So everyone vanished, or was taken, or cursed. They say that when you set foot there, the land remembers, and it won't let you go. "Jesus, Nate," Lila whispered, clutching Zoe's arm. "Now?" Nate lifted his eyes, pale in the firelight. "I'm just saying. Doesn't this feel different?" Like it's waiting for us to realize something we're not supposed to know? Emily shivered violently, though the fire was warm against her skin. The words echoed in her mind, chilling in their simplicity. The land remembers. The night stretched on. They tried to tell more jokes, share more drinks, anything to fill the void, but the unease clung like damp clothes, refusing to lift. At one point, Zoe swore she saw movement, a shape flitting between the trees, but when everyone shone their flashlights, there was nothing. Only the endless curtain of dark. Gradually, fatigue settled in, though none of them truly wanted to admit it. Their bodies craved sleep, but their minds rebelled against the idea of surrendering consciousness in this place. Still, one by one, the group retreated to their tents, leaving only Mark and Emily awake beside the dwindling fire. Emily stared into the flames, speaking softly so as not to wake the others. "Mark, we shouldn't be here." Her voice cracked, the words spilling out with the force of held-in dread. "The captain knew. He tried to warn us. Something's..." Mark reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "It's just nerves, Em. I promise. Tomorrow the ferry will be back. You'll see." But as he said it, his eyes flicked toward the dock in the distance, and the smallest hesitation in his tone betrayed the truth. He didn't believe it either. The fire burned lower, the shadows growing bolder. Emily fought the heaviness in her eyelids, her body demanding rest, but every time she closed her eyes she felt that gaze, something watching from just beyond the firelight. She forced them open again and again, until finally, exhaustion claimed her. When she woke, it was to the sound of whispering. Her heart seized, a cold sweat slicking her skin as she pushed herself upright. The fire had nearly gone out, leaving only a dim orange glow. The camp was still, the others tucked away in their tents. The whispers threaded through the clearing, soft, almost playful, yet carrying a cadence that was undeniably human. She held her breath, straining to listen. The voices were just beyond the trees. Multiple, low, overlapping, as though a crowd gathered unseen. The words were indistinct, but the tone was mocking, sing-song, a twisted parody of laughter. Emily reached for Mark, but his sleeping bag was empty. Panic surged in her chest. She scrambled to her feet, eyes darting frantically across the camp. His tent flap hung open, swaying slightly. He was gone. "Mark?" Her voice cracked, trembling in the night. "Mark, where are you?" The whispers grew louder, shifting in tone, as if responding to her. She staggered back, clutching her flashlight, and swept its beam into the forest. The light caught on branches, twisted roots, and nothing more. But for a fleeting second, she thought she saw a figure, tall, pale, featureless, standing just beyond the reach of light, before it melted into the dark. Her scream ripped through the clearing, jerking the others awake. Tent zippers fumbled, voices called out, panicked and disoriented. Jason stumbled out first, hair wild, face pale. "What the hell happened?" "Mark's gone." Emily sobbed, pointing toward the trees. "He was right here, he was." The whispers stopped. Silence fell like a suffocating shroud. The fire hissed as an ember cracked, sending a faint plume of smoke spiraling upward. And in that silence, something shifted in the dirt at the edge of the clearing. Nate's flashlight swung toward it, beam trembling. There, pressed into the earth, were footprints. Bare, human. Leading away from camp, into the forest. And beside them, barely visible in the soft glow, lay Mark's jacket. Torn clean down the middle, as though ripped apart by unseen hands. The clearing was chaos in the aftermath of Emily's scream. Tents flapped open, lanterns flickered to life, voices rose in panicked fragments. Zoe clutched Lila's arm so tightly her knuckles whitened, while Nate swung his flashlight wildly as though its beam could carve safety out of the darkness. Jason crouched near the footprints, his jaw tight, eyes narrowing as though trying to convince himself they weren't real. But they were, pressed deep into the earth, a trail of bare, human impressions leading straight into the black maw of the forest. Emily's chest heaved as she knelt beside the torn jacket. Her fingers hovered just above the shredded fabric, trembling, unable to touch it. He was here, she whispered, her voice raw. He was right here, and then, he's gone. Jason swallowed hard, his flashlight beam jittering as he swept it over the footprints again. Maybe he wandered off. Sleepwalking. People do that, right? His voice cracked on the last word. No, Emily snapped, spinning toward him, her face streaked with tears. He wouldn't just leave. Not without saying something. Not without me. Her voice broke then, dissolving into a sob that tore at the silence of the night. Nate crouched low, peering at the prints, his face pale. If these are his, why are they barefoot? He went to bed with his boots on. I saw him. The words settled heavy among them. Everyone had noticed it but hadn't dared to say it aloud. The prints were too perfect, too smooth, not just bare but almost delicate. They didn't look like Mark's strong, heavy strides. They looked like something else wearing his form. Zoe shook her head, her voice rising shrill. No, this doesn't make sense. We're letting the dark mess with us. He probably needed the bathroom or something, wandered out, lost track of camp. We'll find him. We just need to go look. She tugged at Lila's sleeve, already pulling her toward the treeline. But Jason caught her arm, stopping her short. Wait. You didn't hear it? Hear what? Zoe spat. The voices, Jason said, his face tight. He looked at Emily, and she nodded through trembling lips. They were whispering. Right before he disappeared. Lila's face drained of color. Whispers? Like children, Emily whispered, shivering violently at the memory. Laughing. Calling. They wanted me to follow. Silence clamped down again, so thick it was hard to breathe. Even the fire seemed smaller, its glow a fragile heartbeat against the crushing dark. Nate stood abruptly, shaking his head. This is insane. I don't care what we heard or didn't hear, Mark's out there. If something dragged him off, then every second we waste is exactly what it wants. Jason's voice was low, almost a growl. His flashlight beam trembled but his eyes burned steady. Haven't you figured it out yet? This place isn't normal. Nothing about it is. If we go chasing after him in the dark, we'll never come back. The group broke then, voices rising, fears spilling over into anger. Zoe argued that leaving Mark behind was unthinkable, Nate demanded action, Lila begged them all to stay together, and Emily's cries wove through it all, desperate, inconsolable. The forest loomed silent, watching, patient, as if feeding on the division. Finally, Jason raised his voice above the others, cutting sharp through the noise. Listen to me. Look around you. This island doesn't want us to leave. Can't you feel it? It's pulling at us, twisting things. That ferry, didn't you notice? It didn't even make a sound when it left. Like it was never there. And now Mark's gone. If we run into those trees now, in the middle of the night, we're finished. His words stilled them, though the silence that followed was ragged, uneven. Zoe shook her head violently, her eyes glistening. So what, we just sit here? Pretend he didn't vanish? Pretend we didn't hear him screaming? Emily froze, her breath catching. I never said he screamed. The group turned toward Zoe, who paled instantly, her lips parting but no sound escaping. The fire popped sharply, a spark leaping into the night like a mocking laugh. Zoe's hands trembled as she finally whispered, I thought I heard. But none of them had. Not one. The realization sank like a stone in water, pulling the group down into a deeper terror. If Zoe had heard something the others hadn't, what did that mean? Were they even experiencing the same reality anymore? Lila clutched Zoe's arm tighter, her voice trembling. We'll wait until morning. Please. If he's out there, we'll find him when there's light. If he's still, she cut herself off, unable to finish the sentence. Emily's sobs quieted into hiccuping breaths, but she didn't argue. She only wrapped her arms around herself, staring into the black forest where the footprints disappeared. The trees seemed to sway, though the air was still, and in the faintest edge of her hearing, she thought she could still make out a whisper, so soft it could have been imagined. Hours crawled past. The group sat huddled close, too afraid to retreat back into their tents, watching as the fire shrank to glowing embers. Shadows lengthened, flickered, stretched, and in their shapes they swore they saw movement, limbs reaching, faces forming, then vanishing when the light shifted. No one dared speak again, afraid their words might call something closer. At last, just when fatigue threatened to overpower fear, a sound cut through the silence. Not a whisper. Not footsteps. A scream. High, shrill, unmistakably human, ripping through the night from deep within the forest. Emily's heart lurched, her body jerking upright as if pulled by strings. She knew that voice. Even ragged, distorted by distance, it was him. "Mark. Help me." The words tore through the trees, strangled with agony. "Please. Emily." Her breath broke into sobs. Without thinking, she staggered to her feet, flashlight beam bouncing wildly as she stumbled toward the treeline. Jason lunged to grab her, but she slipped from his grasp, already running. Her light vanished into the forest, swallowed whole by the dark. The forest swallowed Emily whole the moment she crossed the treeline. The campfire's glow vanished behind her in an instant, replaced by a suffocating darkness that pressed against her skin. Her flashlight beam cut a narrow, trembling path through the trees, illuminating gnarled roots and twisted branches that seemed to reach for her with skeletal hands. Her breath tore ragged in her throat as she stumbled forward, heart pounding so violently she thought it might burst. "Mark," she cried, her voice splintering. "Where are you?" The scream echoed again, distant but unmistakable. "Help me." The words slashed through the stillness like a knife, ragged with pain, laced with desperation. It was him, it had to be him. Emily's legs pumped faster, the earth uneven beneath her boots, twigs snapping, roots clawing at her ankles as if trying to hold her back. She ignored it all, driven only by the voice. The deeper she ran, the stranger the forest became. The trees grew closer together, their trunks warped and bending in unnatural arcs, as though the land itself had twisted under invisible hands. Her flashlight flickered, sputtering once before steadying, and in that brief instant of near darkness she thought she saw figures moving between the trees, small, darting shapes that melted away when the light returned. "Emily." The voice again, closer this time. "Please. It's so dark, I can't." She gasped, clutching the flashlight tighter, forcing herself forward. Branches whipped her face, tearing at her skin, and every shadow seemed alive with movement. The whispers returned, threading through the darkness, weaving around her like a net. Faint laughter, high-pitched and cruel, trickled into her ears. "No," she hissed, shaking her head violently. "You're not real. He's real. Mark is real." But the whispers grew louder, layering over one another, until they became words. "Come closer. Emily, come see what's waiting." Her knees buckled. She stumbled against a tree, gasping for breath. Sweat plastered her hair to her forehead despite the biting chill of the air. She pressed her back to the trunk, forcing herself to breathe, to listen, to focus. Somewhere ahead, she thought she could see a faint light, a glow, pale and unsteady, flickering between the branches. "Emily." Mark's voice again, but this time it wasn't distant. It was right there, just beyond that glow. Her legs moved before her mind could argue. She pushed through the undergrowth, her flashlight beam shaking wildly, until the trees parted into a small clearing. At first, she thought she'd found him. A figure stood at the center of the clearing, shoulders slumped, head bowed. The pale glow illuminated him from below, casting his face in shadow. Her heart leapt. "Mark." But as she staggered forward, the figure lifted its head, and her blood ran cold. It wasn't Mark. Its face was smooth, featureless, skin stretched tight like porcelain. The glow came from the earth itself, where faint symbols pulsed beneath its bare feet, carved deep into the dirt and filled with some faintly luminous substance. The figure tilted its head at her, and though it had no eyes, she felt its gaze pierce her to the bone. Emily froze, every instinct screaming to run. But before she could move, the figure opened its mouth, or where a mouth should have been. And Mark's voice poured out. "Help me, Emily, don't leave me here, come closer." Her scream ripped through the clearing, raw and primal. She stumbled backward, flashlight beams swinging wildly, catching glimpses of other figures between the trees, dozens of them, tall and silent, watching. Some with faces, some without, all standing too still, their bodies stiff like broken marionettes. The whispers crescendoed, rising into a cruel, mocking chorus. "Stay with us, stay forever." Emily turned and bolted, tearing through the forest, branches clawing at her skin, the ground seeming to shift beneath her feet. Her flashlight flickered again, sputtering into darkness, leaving her blind. She ran anyway, her sobs catching in her throat, until a hand caught her wrist. She shrieked, thrashing, but a familiar voice cut through the panic. "Emily! It's me, Jason!" Her flashlight flared back to life, and there he was, breathless, eyes wide with fear. Behind him, Nate and Lila stumbled through the trees, Zoe close behind, her face ghost pale. "What the hell were you thinking?" Jason barked, his voice breaking. "You can't just run off like that." Emily collapsed into his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. "I heard him. I saw him. Jason, he was there, but it wasn't," she choked on the words, trembling violently. Nate grabbed her shoulders, shaking her lightly. "What did you see?" But Emily could only shake her head, unable to describe the horror without breaking apart completely. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. The forest seemed to listen, silent, patient. Then, from somewhere deeper in the trees, the scream came again. Mark's voice. "Emily! Please! It's so cold, don't leave me!" Everyone froze, blood draining from their faces. Jason's grip on Emily tightened, and Zoe covered her ears with a sob. The sound was closer now, impossibly close, as if he were standing just beyond the next tree. But Emily knew the truth. Her voice came out as a whisper, broken and terrified. "That's not him." The words hung between them, heavy and final. And then, just beyond their light, something moved. A shadow darted between the trees, fast and deliberate. The group turned their flashlights as one, beams colliding in a frantic sweep of white. For a heartbeat, they caught it, tall, pale, moving on impossibly long limbs. It froze in the light, featureless face tilting toward them. Then it was gone, melting into the dark. The group stumbled through the undergrowth, flashlights quivering, breath tearing from their lungs in ragged bursts. None of them dared speak at first, as though words might summon the pale things they had seen, the things that now lingered just beyond their lights. Emily clung to Jason's arm, her legs weak and trembling, her throat raw from sobbing. Zoe kept muttering under her breath, half prayers, half frantic repetitions of "We need to go, we need to go, we need to go." It was Nate who finally broke the silence, his voice low and sharp, carrying a weight that made them all listen. "We're going back. To the dock. Right now." No one argued. Not even Lila, who was usually quick with objections. They turned as one, orienting themselves toward where the shoreline should be. The forest thinned slightly, giving way to sloping ground. The faint roar of the tide reached their ears, a whisper of familiarity in the chaos. It was enough to give them hope. But as they pushed onward, the hope began to sour. The sound of waves didn't grow louder as it should have, instead, it seemed to circle them, weaving through the trees in strange, hollow echoes. The ground underfoot felt wrong, too. They had crossed these woods before, earlier in the day, but now the earth seemed spongy in places, as though they were walking on something that gave under their weight, not soil but something softer, something that shifted when stepped on. Jason's flashlight beam caught movement ahead. "There," he whispered, relief flooding his voice. Through the trees, the moonlight reflected off water, dark, rippling, unmistakable. The ocean. The dock. Salvation. They broke into a sprint, crashing through the undergrowth until the trees gave way and the open shoreline spread before them. The dock stretched into the water just as they remembered it, its weathered planks glowing silver in the moonlight. But there was something wrong. The water lapped too slowly against the shore, each wave dragging itself forward like a tired breath. The dock itself seemed longer than before, impossibly long, stretching out into the blackness of the sea until it vanished. And at its end, there was a boat. Not the ferry. Not even close. It was a smaller vessel, ancient and rotted, its wooden sides swollen with decay. Torn nets dangled from its mast, swaying without wind. And though it was moored to the dock, it moved as though something beneath the water was pulling it gently, urging it closer. Zoe's hand clamped on Emily's arm. "No," she whispered. "No, that wasn't here before. That wasn't." "Doesn't matter," Nate cut in, his voice trembling but firm. "It's a boat. It's something. We're not staying here." But Emily couldn't move. Her feet refused. She stared at the boat, and the longer she looked, the more certain she became that it was watching her back. She couldn't explain it, boats didn't have eyes, but the shadows between its rotted planks seemed to shift, as though something inside leaned forward to peer through the cracks. "Emily." Jason's voice was sharp. Commanding. "We don't have a choice." He pulled her forward, and the group stepped onto the dock. The wood groaned under their weight, damp and soft, the boards bowing unnaturally as though they had absorbed too much water, or too much blood. Each step seemed to sink deeper, the sound echoing across the still water. Halfway down the dock, Emily heard it again. The whispers. They rose from the sea itself this time, bubbling up between the waves. They didn't come from her head, not this time. They were real. She could hear them clearly, the words distinct, layered with too many voices to count. "Stay with us, don't leave, it's too late now." Emily faltered, her knees locking. "Stop. Stop. Can't you hear it?" But the others pressed forward, too desperate to listen. Zoe glanced back, her face pale with terror. "Don't say it. Don't." Her voice broke off. The boat had shifted. It was closer now. Much closer. Though none of them had seen it move, it now bobbed directly at the dock's edge, waiting. The torn nets swayed violently now, though the air was still. Jason tightened his grip on Emily's wrist. "Get in," he ordered. His voice was harsh, but his eyes betrayed him, wide and afraid, shimmering with doubt. Nate and Lila were already climbing over the side, their boots scraping against the slick, algae-covered wood. Zoe hung back, frozen at the edge, her chest rising and falling in short, shallow bursts. Emily shook her head furiously, pulling against Jason's grip. "No. No, it's not right. Don't you see? It's not the way out, it's how they keep us here." Her words sliced through the air, sharp, desperate. For a moment, Jason faltered. His grip loosened, his eyes darting to the shifting shadows inside the boat. Then the water beneath them rippled. Something large brushed against the dock supports, the wood shuddering under the impact. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, a frantic chorus. "Come aboard, come aboard, come aboard." And then Mark's voice rose above them all. "Jason. Please. Hurry. They'll leave without you." It came from the boat. From inside the darkness. Jason froze. His face drained of color, his mouth trembling open as the voice echoed again, clearer, closer. "Don't let them leave me here, Jason. Don't let me die here." Emily screamed and shoved him back, breaking his trance. "That's not him. That's not Mark." But the damage was done. The boat creaked loudly, its sides splitting wider. From within, pale hands emerged, dozens of them, clawing the air, reaching for the dock. They grasped with wet, gurgling sounds, some missing fingers, some too long and jointed in the wrong places. The shadows inside shifted, and shapes began to rise, dragging themselves into the moonlight. The dock groaned louder, shaking under the weight of things that shouldn't exist. And then the first pale figure pulled itself onto the planks, its faceless head tilting toward Emily. The dock quivered beneath their feet, vibrating with the weight of unseen things below the waterline. Every plank seemed alive, swollen with the groans of the sea, as though the entire structure were breathing. The pale figure that had heaved itself onto the boards stood with a sickening stillness, its limbs hanging too loosely, bent at crooked angles like broken marionette strings. Its face, or the place where a face should have been, was smooth and blank, a canvas of clammy flesh. Only the faint hollows where eyes should exist betrayed some semblance of humanity, but even they were wrong, too deep, too empty, bottomless pits that reflected nothing. Emily stumbled back, her scream lodged tight in her throat. The thing tilted its head as though curious, and in that motion something shifted deep inside her stomach, a recognition that no part of this creature belonged in her world. It was a corruption of form, a mockery of life, wearing a body like a poorly fitted costume. Behind it, more hands clawed the edges of the boat, pulling others into view. They rose in jerks and spasms, dragging themselves with wet slaps onto the boards. Some had bodies bloated as though drowned, skin gray-blue and sagging. Others were thin, skeletal, their joints bulging grotesquely, their movements twitching. The whispers grew louder as more of them surfaced, but now Emily realized the voices weren't coming from mouths, they had none. The sound vibrated directly into the air, seeping through the dock, through the water, into the bones of everyone standing there. Jason staggered back, clutching Emily's arm, but his eyes were still wide, still glassy, like he was listening to something only he could hear. "It's Mark," he muttered. He's calling me." Emily shook him violently. "No. Jason, look at them. That's not him." But he wasn't listening. None of them were. Lila had sunk to her knees, her flashlight clattering uselessly onto the planks as she pressed her hands to her ears. Zoe was sobbing, her body trembling with the effort of keeping herself from bolting into the water. Nate was the only one who seemed remotely functional, but even he swayed slightly, his face twisted in sick disbelief. The first faceless figure stepped forward. Its legs bent unnaturally, the knees bowing backward before correcting themselves with an audible crack. Each step echoed as though the wood beneath it recognized the thing, resonating with its presence. The group backed away in unison, but the dock stretched on impossibly long, the beach behind them shrinking in a way that made no sense. Emily's lungs burned as panic set in. The dock wasn't just a dock anymore, it was changing, stretching into an endless bridge, the shore retreating, the ocean swallowing everything familiar. The figures multiplied. Their blank heads turned in eerie synchronization, all tilting to the same angle as though listening to some hidden frequency. Then, without warning, they opened their mouths. They had no lips, only gaping voids that split impossibly wide, stretching ear to ear. From those holes came the voices. "Stay. Belong. With us." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They struck with the weight of inevitability, burrowing deep into the mind like nails driven into wood. Emily's knees weakened, her body swaying toward the sound before she clamped her hands over her ears. It didn't help, the words weren't heard, they were felt. Jason lurched forward, nearly tearing free from Emily's grip, but she locked onto him, screaming in his face. "It's not him. Jason, please, look at me." Tears blurred her vision, but her voice carried the raw desperation of someone watching the last thread of sanity snap in a loved one. Jason's eyes fluttered, confusion flickering there. For one fragile second, she thought she'd broken through. Then the figures began to move faster. They surged forward in uneven bursts, their limbs bending, snapping, resetting as they crawled over one another. The dock shook violently now, groaning as though seconds away from collapse, but still it held. The sea boiled beneath, pale shapes gliding just under the surface, circling, waiting. Nate roared over the cacophony, his voice hoarse but commanding. "Run!" But where? The dock behind them stretched impossibly far now, the shoreline swallowed by fog. The only direction left was forward, toward the boat, toward the swarm of faceless things that advanced like a tide. Panic fractured the group. Zoe bolted first, breaking for the side, trying to leap into the water. "I can swim. I can make it," she shrieked. But as she leapt, something pale and massive erupted from beneath the surface. It wasn't a hand this time, it was worse. A gaping maw, circular and rimmed with concentric rows of teeth, like a lamprey made monstrously large, snapped around her midsection. Zoe's scream cut off instantly as she was dragged under, the water closing over her with a splash that painted the dock red. The silence afterward was unbearable. Emily's stomach heaved, bile scorching her throat, but there was no time to grieve. The faceless things had closed the gap. One lunged, its two long fingers swiping at Jason, missing by inches as he yanked Emily back. Lila wailed, clutching Nate's arm, but Nate's focus was already narrowed to one brutal truth: the only way out was through. "Run forward," he bellowed, shoving them toward the boat. "Move!" Emily stumbled, Jason half-dragging her as they pounded across the planks. The boat loomed larger, its rotted hull creaking as though it was aware, waiting. The figures followed, their movements jerky but fast, their bodies bending in impossible ways to close the distance. Each step forward felt like stepping deeper into a nightmare that had no bottom, no end. The boat's shadow opened before them, and as Emily's foot hit the last plank, she felt it, the entire dock inhaled. The boards swelled upward under her soles, pulsing like veins beneath skin. The faceless things screamed, not with sound, but with vibrations that tore through the marrow of her bones. Jason shoved her onto the boat, and she hit the deck hard, the impact jarring her teeth. Nate and Lila scrambled after her, but Jason froze at the edge, staring into the abyss behind them. The figures surged closer, their hands reaching, their whispers overlapping into one endless drone. And then, Mark's voice again. Clear. Desperate. "Jason. Help me." Jason turned, eyes wide, tears spilling freely now. For a heartbeat, he teetered between salvation and damnation. And Emily, lying sprawled on the deck, screamed his name until her throat tore. The faceless things lunged. Jason stood frozen at the edge, one hand gripping the rotten railing of the boat, the other trembling midair as if reaching towards something invisible. His face was pale, his eyes glassy, his mouth twitching around words he didn't yet speak. The whispers surged louder behind him, faceless things spilling forward like a human tide. Their blank heads snapped upward in unison, every one of them tilting at the exact same angle as though puppeteered by one mind. The dock trembled violently now, each board splitting and oozing brackish water as though the entire structure was melting into the sea. Emily clawed forward on hands and knees, her throat raw as she screamed his name. "Jason! Get in! Now!" Her fingernails dug into the slimy deck of the boat, anchoring herself against the rising sense that even the wood beneath her didn't want her there. Nate grabbed Jason's arm and wrenched hard, snarling, "Move, damn it." But Jason resisted, tears cutting down his cheeks. His voice cracked as he whispered, "It's him. I swear it's him. He needs me." The swarm lunged. Nate yanked Jason with brute force, dragging him over the railing just as the first faceless figure slammed against the side of the boat. Its hands clawed at the wood, nails, or something like nails, scraping deep grooves into the damp hull. Jason collapsed onto the deck, his sobs choking into silence, while the others scrambled backward as more pale hands began to hook over the edge. The boat lurched violently, pitching them sideways. Emily slammed against the railing, her ribs protesting with a sharp crack. Lila shrieked, gripping the mast as the vessel shuddered like a beast coming awake. Beneath their feet, the deck throbbed faintly, pulsing as though blood ran through hidden veins. The whispers shifted, no longer a murmur but a roar, reverberating from the faceless things and from the boat itself. "Stay! Stay! Stay!" The chant crawled into their skulls, grinding against the fragile line between thought and obedience. Emily pressed her hands to her ears, but the word kept ringing inside her head, louder, relentless. The boat began to move. Slowly at first, with a groan of ancient wood and snapping rope, it pulled free of the dock. No sails filled, no oars touched water, yet the vessel glided forward, carried by an unseen current. The dock splintered behind them, breaking apart under the weight of the faceless swarm, pieces collapsing into the sea as the creatures spilled after them like a collapsing wave. But none seemed to follow the boat. They stopped at the shattered edge, blank heads turning in unison, their stillness more horrifying than pursuit. They simply watched. Emily pushed herself upright, clutching her side where pain burned deep. "They're letting us go," she whispered, but even as she said it, dread coiled in her stomach. The faceless things hadn't retreated, they were waiting. The way they stood, perfectly still, perfectly aligned, was not surrender. It was patience. The boat creaked, its timbers groaning like bones shifting in their sockets. A foul stench rose from below deck, thick and cloying, the unmistakable reek of rot and salt-stained flesh. Zoe's blood still slicked Emily's clothes, her scream still rattled her memory, and now that smell layered itself atop it, pressing her toward nausea. Nate lit the lantern he'd salvaged, the flame sputtering weakly as it illuminated the warped interior of the deck. The light revealed carvings etched into the wood, hundreds of them, overlapping, tangled, almost alive. Symbols, names, crude figures, faces scratched into the boards by desperate hands. Lila leaned close to one, her eyes wide and trembling. These are names," she whispered. "Look, Emily, Jason, Mark, even Zoe." Her voice cracked on the last name, but she pressed a trembling finger to the etching. "It's us. They're already here." Emily's blood ran cold. She stared at the crude scratches, the letters crooked and uneven, as though carved by someone in a frenzy. Her name was there. So were the names of her friends. And scattered around them were dozens more, faded by time, eaten by rot, belonging to people they would never know. Jason crawled toward the railing, his face pale, sweat dripping down his temples. He leaned out over the black water, staring into the void with hollow eyes. "He's still out there," he muttered, voice hoarse. "I can feel him. Mark's here. He's waiting." His hands tightened on the railing as though he might hurl himself overboard. Emily lunged and grabbed his shirt, yanking him back. "No! That's not him, Jason. That's..." But before she could finish, something slammed against the hull from below. The entire boat rocked violently, nearly capsizing. A thunderous crack echoed up from beneath the water, followed by another impact that made the planks bow inward. Nate stumbled and dropped the lantern, the flame flickering dangerously before sputtering out, plunging them into suffocating dark once more. The sea boiled around them, froth churning as shapes writhed beneath the surface. Long, pale bodies slithered against the hull, their skin slick and luminous in flashes of moonlight. The whispering returned, not from the faceless things on the dock now but from beneath the waves, hundreds of voices speaking at once, rising through the water like bubbles. "Join us. We've waited. You're already ours." The boat groaned in answer, its timbers splitting, its deck bending as though it were not resisting the assault but welcoming it. And then, with a long, shuddering sigh, the trapdoor in the center of the deck yawned open. The stench that erupted was unbearable, wet decay, the sour tang of blood, the suffocating musk of something ancient. The opening gaped like a wound, wide and pulsing, the stairs leading downward warped into shapes that resembled ribs instead of wood. Cold air rushed upward, carrying with it faint moans, human but distorted, as though stretched too far across the limits of breath. Emily's skin prickled, bile rising in her throat as she stumbled back from the opening. Lila covered her mouth, sobbing uncontrollably, while Jason stared at the stairs with hungry, fever-bright eyes. His lips parted as he whispered, "He's down there. Mark's down there." Nate's face twisted with grim certainty. He shook his head violently. "No. No one's down there. That's a grave. It's not him, Jason, it's where they drag you when they're done with you." But Jason didn't hear him. His body shifted forward, pulled by some unseen tether, his steps slow but deliberate as he approached the opening. The moans rose louder, mingled with the whispers, threading together into one irresistible call. Emily screamed his name again, but Jason didn't turn. He placed his foot on the first stair. And the trapdoor slammed shut. The boat groaned with satisfaction, its deck ceiling smooth once more as though no opening had ever existed. Jason staggered backward, confused, his face twisting into despair. Emily's relief lasted only seconds before the boat lurched again, turning sharply, steering itself toward the deeper waters where the moonlight failed to reach. The faceless watchers on the shattered dock disappeared into the mist, their still silhouettes swallowed by fog. Ahead, only endless sea remained. And somewhere in the dark water below, something massive moved, circling. The sea was no longer water. It moved like something alive, rolling beneath the boat in heavy pulses that sent vibrations through the planks. Emily pressed her palm against the deck, and for the first time, she realized it wasn't the ocean rocking them, it was the boat itself, breathing, each inhale and exhale rattling its rotten frame. The air had grown colder, the mist thicker, so dense it felt like walking through milk. The moon above was no longer visible, swallowed entirely, leaving them adrift in a world stripped of horizon. Nate stood near the bow, shoulders hunched, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles cracked. His voice was steady, but his eyes darted nervously as he whispered, "It's taking us somewhere. We're not in control. This isn't a ferry, it's a path." His words sank into Emily like knives because she knew he was right. No matter what they did, the vessel was carrying them towards something, and the faceless swarm had let them leave only because that was the plan all along. Jason sat slumped against the mast, his face pale, eyes bloodshot from crying. He whispered Mark's name over and over, rocking slightly with the rhythm of the boat. Lila hovered close to him, not out of comfort but out of fear of being alone. She clutched her necklace in trembling hands, muttering prayers that tangled into sobs, every syllable swallowed by the damp air. Then came the sound. It began as a low groan, so deep it seemed to tremble up from the water itself. A vibration at first, more felt than heard, but quickly swelling into a tone that seemed to stretch the very air around them. Emily's teeth ached. Her ribs rattled. The lantern, relit after Nate's struggle, flickered and dimmed as though even fire bent beneath the sound. The groan shifted into something worse, voices. Not human, not entirely, but echoes of humanity bent out of shape. They called from the deep and overlapping waves, like a choir trapped underwater. "Welcome home. We've waited so long. Your names are written. You cannot leave." Emily's stomach twisted violently, her breath catching in her throat. She stumbled back until her shoulder hit the railing. Her vision blurred as the whispers drilled into her skull, each word tugging at something inside her, fraying the edges of her will. Jason, however, sat up straighter, eyes bright with feverish recognition. He mouthed the words as if he knew them, as if he had always known them. Then, without warning, the sea split. The water ahead of the boat churned and parted, an impossible rift tearing open in the ocean itself. Black waves rose high on either side like walls, dripping salt and foam, as a gaping trench yawned open. The boat did not hesitate. It turned smoothly, obediently, and began to glide straight into the abyss. The air grew foul, heavy with brine and decay, as though the sea had kept the scent of every body it had swallowed and was now exhaling all at once. Lila screamed and clutched Emily's arm, pointing over the side. Shapes moved in the rising walls of water, pale limbs twisting, faces pressed against the shifting waves. Not human faces. They had too many eyes, or none at all. Mouths stretched wide, silent screams caught forever in the liquid prison. They drifted with the current, staring at the boat as it passed, reaching out with desperate hands that dissolved into spray before making contact. The trench deepened, the walls rising higher until the night sky itself was gone. They were traveling through a canyon of water, the boat sliding lower and lower into a world without air. The deeper they went, the more the sound changed. The voices became clearer, sharper, some whispering promises of warmth and reunion, others shrieking demands for surrender. Every voice seemed to target one of them specifically, knowing what to say, what pain to touch. Jason leaned over the railing, his face alight with desperate hope. "Mark. He's calling me. Don't you hear him?" His voice cracked, pleading, as though the others had become the enemy for denying him. He scrambled to climb the rail, his legs swinging over the side. Emily lunged and grabbed his shirt, screaming, "That's not him. It's never been him." Her nails dug into the fabric, but Jason thrashed violently, stronger than she expected. His hands clawed at her wrists, his eyes wild. "Let me go! I can see him! He's right there!" For one horrifying moment, Emily thought she might actually lose her grip. Nate rushed forward, tackling Jason to the deck. The two men crashed hard, Jason screaming, kicking, his voice rising into an animalistic howl. Lila collapsed into sobs, rocking against the mast as if she could block it all out. The boat tilted sharply, pulling them all sideways. Emily slammed into the railing, stars exploding in her vision as pain shot through her shoulder. Nate cursed, struggling to pin Jason, while water sloshed over the deck. The trench walls convulsed, slamming inward, and for a breathless second Emily thought they would be crushed. But the boat did not stop, it only groaned with pleasure, its rotten boards warping, stretching, as though feeding on their fear. Then the trench opened wider, revealing what lay ahead. At the bottom of the abyss, far below, something stirred. It was vast, its shape obscured by distance and black water, but Emily saw the faint outlines, curved ridges like spines, long appendages dragging through the deep, a maw that seemed to open without end. The water itself vibrated with its presence, as though the sea belonged to it, as though the world had always belonged to it. The voices merged into one colossal thought, thundering inside their skulls. "Come down." The boat tilted again, nose pointing directly into the depths. It had chosen its course. They were being delivered. The descent felt endless. The boat creaked and shuddered as though every board was on the verge of splintering apart, yet it continued plunging into the trench, deeper than any sea had the right to go. The walls of water towered above them like liquid cliffs, groaning with imprisoned faces that slid past in mournful silence. Emily clung to the railing, her nails breaking against the damp wood, her lungs straining as the air grew thin and cold, every breath tasting like brine. Jason had gone still, his body slack in Nate's grip, but his eyes were locked on the abyss below with a glassy hunger that made Emily's skin crawl. His lips moved in silent prayer, mouthing words she couldn't hear but somehow understood. He was calling out to whatever waited beneath, begging to be claimed. Lila had collapsed into herself, curled tight on the deck with her necklace pressed against her lips, her muffled sobs lost in the vibration of the sea. Then, without warning, the trench ended. The boat slid out of the canyon into a cavernous void, a place beyond the reach of sunlight or moonlight, where only the faint green glow of something vast illuminated the water. It was no island, no sea floor. It was a body. A colossal mass stretched as far as the eye could see, ridged with spines that curved upward like mountains, its flesh mottled with scars that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins. At the center of this impossible creature was a mouth, or what resembled one. Not circular, not even symmetrical, but an endless fracture in reality itself, lined with teeth like shards of stone, yawning wide enough to swallow the boat whole. Emily's legs trembled beneath her. Her body screamed to collapse, to surrender, but her mind clawed at survival with frantic desperation. She realized the truth with sudden, sickening clarity: the ferry had never been a vessel at all. It was part of this thing, an appendage, a lure. A trap designed to carry the living into the pit. The whispers boomed louder now, no longer fragmented but unified, a single thought pressing down on their skulls with unbearable weight. "You belong here. All who step aboard belong here." Jason tore free of Nate's weakening grip. His face was transformed, lit with rapture, his eyes brimming with tears of devotion. "Don't you see? We've come home. This is where we were always meant to be." He stumbled to the railing, arms wide as though to embrace the abyss. Nate lunged after him, grabbing his jacket, but Jason only smiled. "It's calling me." He threw himself overboard. Emily screamed, but Jason never hit water. He didn't fall. He was pulled, his body drawn down in one smooth motion into the glowing fissure of the beast's maw. His scream rose only once before cutting off, swallowed whole. The sea rumbled with satisfaction, and the boat trembled like a predator licking its lips. Nate staggered back, shaking, his face pale with shock. We have to fight it. We can't just give in." But his voice cracked with despair, betraying the hopelessness bleeding through his resolve. The deck beneath them shifted, stretching unnaturally, boards elongating as though the boat itself was being reabsorbed into the monstrous body. The lantern sputtered out. The glow from the abyss cast shadows that bent and twisted unnaturally across their faces. Emily grabbed Lila, dragging her upright, forcing her to stand though her friend's legs buckled beneath her weight. And then, like a knife in the dark, memory returned. Emily saw them, as children, playing on the island years ago, chasing each other through the sand while the tide lapped at their ankles. She remembered the old fisherman they'd met at the dock, the one who had warned them not to wander too far, the one whose eyes had been pale and milky. His voice returned now, whispering from the past, "The island keeps what it takes. The ferry never leaves. Once you board, you never return." Her heart stopped. The fisherman had not been warning them for the future. He had been remembering them. They had been here before. Emily gasped, gripping Nate's arm with a strength born of terror. "Don't you see? We've done this already. We came here as kids, we never left. We've been here all along." Her voice cracked as the realization tore through her. "We never made it back. This is why no ferries come here. This is why no one remembers. We are the lost." Nate's eyes widened in horror. He shook his head violently. "No. No, that's impossible. We went home. We grew up. His words faltered, unraveling. He looked at Emily, then at Lila, then at his own trembling hands, as if trying to prove to himself they were real. But the truth pressed harder, undeniable. Memories blurred, looping back on themselves, their childhood summers bleeding into their adulthood like reflections on broken glass. The voices laughed. Not cruelly, but patiently, like parents indulging children. "You are ours. You always were. You never left." The boat tilted sharply, the maw below yawning wider, and Emily felt her body sliding toward the railing. Nate caught her, his grip firm, but his face was hollow with despair. Lila screamed, clutching at her necklace, but it snapped in her hands, beads scattering across the deck before tumbling into the abyss. The ferry shuddered one last time, its rotten frame dissolving, boards splitting apart into strands of flesh that curled downward toward the mouth. They were no longer passengers. They were offerings. Emily locked eyes with Nate, her voice breaking. "We can't escape. But maybe we can resist. Maybe we don't give it the satisfaction." But Nate only stared into the abyss, his grip loosening, his lips trembling with the weight of acceptance. "It doesn't matter. It's already written." The final moment came not with a scream, but with silence. The boat, the friends, the last flicker of their fragile reality, all drawn downward into the endless maw. The sea above closed in, the trench ceiling shut as though it had never been. The island lay waiting for the next ferry to arrive, for the next curious souls to step aboard, believing they were choosing adventure. But no ferry would ever return. Because no ferry had ever returned. The friends realized too late that they had never left the island as children. They had always been trapped, their lives afterward false memories created by the creature. The ferry was never a boat, it was part of the monster, luring victims back into the abyss.